Thank you for joining me on live stream. We are going across LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and I think that there's an issue with my Twitter at the moment, so we're not going to be appearing on Twitter. But I really wanted to speak with you today and share our conversation. The conversation we've been having together with our online audience. And innovation, that we're here to talk about innovation, and I'm really interested to hear you explain how you came to work in that space and what innovation means to you. So there's some really large questions, and then some that are more directed towards working with an individual versus a company. So that's the nature of our conversation. But firstly, for those who don't know me, my name's Natalie Coulson. I run a business called Amped Up Marketing and Communications. I specialize in personal branding, but also content marketing. And Suzanne and I started to talk because we're both really obsessed with transformation. So that and change, and of course, innovation is a huge part of that. So I won't keep on talking, and I also don't think that I can give you a proper introduction. So I would rather you introduce yourself, Suzanne, and your credentials, where you're from. Give us a bit of a bio.
All right. No pressure. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. And I'm really excited about our conversation today. And, I hope if people have questions along the way, please put them in the chat. Happy to dive into those as well. So I am Dutch, which you might have picked up in my accent. I studied systems engineering back in the day. I ran a family business for a while, which was specifically in manufacturing. Then I studied law because I was like, I want to learn this language and focus more on that. Decided that law was not the avenue for me though. And then I joined ING, and they approached me. They said, you have this entrepreneurial background, you have a technical background, and we're looking to build the bank of the future. And your profile is exactly what we need to make that happen. I was like, sold, I'm in. So I started as a banker, wholesale banker, investment banker, basically, and worked with a lot of large corporates in their financing needs. And at some point, I was like, we could do this better. We could do this smarter. So the systems engineer in me is constantly looking at how can we do things smarter and better and streamline things, and what is the next new thing we can do. And I noticed that, for example, I was living in Singapore for a while as well, and I noticed that we were copy pasting a lot, and then we were printing out physical documents to get signatures on them. And I was like, but we can connect these things, we can make them talk to each other, and we can do these things digital. This was before COVID, so before there was any pressure to do everything online. So that was for me something like a very clear drive to just look at how can we do things better, and how do I help other people addressing the things that they see that can be done better, and give them the tools and the mindset and ways of working to actually make that change. So I was doing the banking work, but then an opportunity came up for me to permanently move to Singapore to set up an innovation lab. And so one of the things we were also going to chat about is like, what is innovation, and what are like the different flavors of innovation? So I would love to touch upon that a little bit, also linked to the innovation lab, because what I was talking about before, like streamlining processes and how can we do things better, closer to our day-to-day core business, whereas a lot of innovation centers, innovation labs are more about let's build startups, let's build the future, let's go to the moon. And often when I speak with people about innovation, they have a picture in their head of innovation is startups, it is new tech, it is hoodies and sitting in a beanbag with your laptop and coding all night. And that can be innovation, but that's not all of it. So you have, on one side of the spectrum, you have more like the incremental improvements closer to your core business, and then all the way on the other side of the spectrum, you have the more disruptive new technology, where you're entering new markets and potentially also with new customer groups. So we have that spectrum, and the innovation lab that we set up was focused more on that disruptive side of the spectrum. So creating new startups and setting up partnerships with existing companies that could bring a new offering. but it still kept me awake at night that there were people copy pasting, and that had systems and structures that just didn't work for them. So over the last few years, I've been focusing more on how can we bring some of those principles that we have in the innovation lab in terms of ways of working, tooling, prioritization, time management. How can we bring that to the rest of the organization? How can we spread that out to people who don't drive new innovation every day, but still can make small steps and small improvements and small innovations on a day-to-day basis in their working context, but also in their personal context. Let me just pause there.
Yeah, no, I think what I find really interesting about this is when I think of innovation, or before we started speaking, I always thought of innovation, perhaps not always startups and hoodies, but definitely linked to creativity, like almost visual creativity or even new tech, like you were saying. But just thinking about the efficiency side, I think is a very, for me, a different way of looking at innovation. Is that a typical misconception, do you think, that it's all creativity?
Yes. I think it's like to be innovative, you have to come up with a lot of ideas. Like you have to be super creative, otherwise you're not innovative. And I think what I've seen in the past is a lot of people, as a result of that, don't get started because they feel it's something that's removed from them. And what is so important for me is that innovation is something inclusive, because you need different perspectives, you need different people who are involved in a process to come together to solve for something. Because at its core, innovation is about solving problems and creating value for people. And you cannot do that in isolation. And you can have the best ideas, but an idea is just one part of the process.
You actually need to implement it.
Exactly, and test it. So that's another thing. I think that might also be another big misconception is, you come up with a big idea and you do it, and that's innovation. Like it has to be big, it has to be disruptive, it has to be new to the world and dramatic. But it is more about identifying a problem, like identifying a need, what is currently missing or what is currently not working, and then in a structured way find out how can we solve for that, rather than starting with the big idea and launching it only to realize that actually it's not working. And this is also something we've seen a lot, mostly also in large corporates, where there's a big new rollout of a new technology or a new solution or a new tool, and it's presented as this, we're going to fix everything with this new thing. But that big bang rollout then takes a few years, often goes a bit over budget, and then by the time it's launched, it actually does not solve the problem that is underlying for most of the people. And then they have to operate two systems in parallel that don't want to talk to each other, which goes back to my earlier comment about like Excel sheets and things and copy pasting, because we haven't focused enough on what is the root of the problem here and what is something we can do to improve it. And sometimes it can be something small, like writing a little bit of code or a macro in Excel to link two things together, rather than setting up $1 million project that will run for a few years, only to then realize it doesn't really solve the root of the problem.
I know I've worked with some amazing change managers and project managers who, they would be horrified to hear this, but also they could probably relate to it. I think, that's a whole other conversation, I realized, about interrogating the problem and in the early stage. I can just hear them going, no, we wouldn't let that happen. But in reality, it does happen. And so I've also worked on projects where we always talk about BAU. We're always saying, once we get to BAU, then this will happen. And so, what does innovation look like? Okay, in the example, so I know you've provided the example of $1 million project, which actually is possibly a small project, right? $1 million for a large business, but it doesn't work, or it doesn't. So how do you continue to innovate in that kind of situation in the BAU environment?
So we've done a number of projects in a number of different ways over the last few years to just see, I have a certain idea about what innovation as part of business as usual looks like, but then it was also like testing that out and validating, am I actually right with the idea that I have? So what we've done is a few years ago, we ran a campaign to understand what do we need to fix for you to make your life easier. It was called 10 times better. So we're asking people, what do you need to be 10 times better? What are the problems we need to solve? And there was such a wide range of challenges that people provided. So we then picked a few to work on with the team. So, you know, my dream is that in terms of business is innovation as business as usual, meaning that on a regular basis, people think about what are the things that are slowing me down? What are the things that are not helping me to move forward? And how do I solve for them? And who do I need to solve for this in a way that also does not negatively impact others? So that is for me the dream, that it's just something always on the agenda, and it's someone that everybody also feels responsible for. So what we did in this case with this 10 times better campaign, and we also did one specifically around customer experience, it was really about, again, asking people what is in your way. And as I mentioned, we got this wide range of things, and some were about how do we make meetings more efficient, because I spend so much time in meetings. Another one was about I have these big databases within Excel, and I want to automate how I work with them and actually generate insights from them. So we focused on the things that people put forward to us, and we then guided them through the innovation process. And as you already mentioned, there's a lot of focus on first on deeply understanding the problem, meaning what does it look like, feel like, smell like, taste like, basically? What does the current process look like? Why is it not great? Who else is involved? And what is the thing we're trying to get done here? And also providing the tools for people to make that happen. So the structures, the ways of thinking, like how do you approach this? How do you involve other stakeholders? How do you ask them questions in a way that are not leading, but actually getting you the data that you need? And then as a next step, once we clearly identify like this is the root of the problem, helping them work through generating new ideas. And what I find really interesting is that a lot of the people that also say like, oh, I never have any ideas, like I'm not very creative, they can come up with the greatest things, because it doesn't have to be new to the world. It's like, what have we seen working in the past? What can we reuse? And then sometimes we do have an opportunity to come up with something completely new by just facilitating a workshop. And as I mentioned, it's not all about the new ideas. It's just, that's just a small part of the puzzle. And then the next step was like, okay, we now have this big blob of ideas. Let's now narrow it down and see what we can build first, and in a structured way keep checking, are we not actually solving that problem? And by going through this process and showing people this is how you can innovate, this is how you can solve problems, they were actually empowered to keep doing that, but without us necessarily being there the whole time, because they had the toolkit, they had seen it before, they felt they can do it. So that is where what I find really amazing to do is that, you know, working myself out of a job, that I show like this is how you can do it, teach people how to do it, and then I'm basically hands off, because they can just do it themselves and also spread the word.
And then speaking of spreading the word, so I worked on as a comms manager across these change programs I'm talking about, and leadership, we always needed to cascade the information from leadership, because if leadership didn't take charge of the idea of the didn't articulate how the problem was being solved with this change program or the innovation, it was really difficult to communicate and keep everyone on track. So what is the role of leadership in innovation in general?
Yeah, so I think there's a few levels when it comes to leadership in innovation. So first of all, it's really important to have the support top down to work on innovation, that it's a priority, that it is something mentioned as, yes, this is something that we need to do and we're all responsible for. So that's one thing. And then the second is also actually understanding what it means to work on innovation, because it requires a different way of working with people as a leader. Because if we are looking at more business as usual activities, say, for example, doing a business deal, we know what the steps in the process look like. We also know where we potentially don't move forward, where the risks are in that sense. But the process is like clear. We know what we need to deliver. We know what we need to do. Every step of the way is clear, which is something as a manager you can then drive for execution and for like very clear deliverables in terms of like timelines. Like you can drive on that execution, which is more like the management style. So what we see within innovation projects, it is not very clear what the next step is going to be, because everything is based on the information that you find. So as you're doing your research around the problem beforehand, we might have a hunch about how big the size of the problem is and who is involved, but we will only surely know once we have done the research. And the same goes for the solution, and the problem goes before the solution. So as a manager or as a leader, you cannot really execute your way into innovation. You cannot manage the process in terms of an execution process. So the hat that a leader needs to put on to support an innovation project successfully is more that of a mentor. And this is more about asking questions rather than driving the process forward with like, we need to have a deadline to catch, but it's more, what have you learned so far? How do you know this? Where's your data? Like, where are you getting this from? And what do you need to learn next?
So the leader could be very much on their own learning journey with that, but they just need to be that one step above as the guide.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also one of the reasons why I really enjoy one-on-one coaching as well, because I can guide them through that transition. And I've had the pleasure of also working with a number of leaders actually doing an innovation project, because I feel that if you do it yourself, if you feel how to do an innovation project, it's so much easier afterwards to also empathize with people in an innovation project. It's easier for you to guide them because you know what they're going through. And yeah, I just have some really fond memories of going through those projects, and also the coaching trajectory around it still with some, so that they can just be better leaders for their teams. But that being said, this is like the top-down leadership. But what I've also really noticed is that you don't have to be the boss or the highest paid person in the room to drive innovation. It is because it is so data driven actually, and so evidence based, and it's really about understanding the problem and understanding how we can find a solution. It can actually come bottom up. Innovation leadership can come from any part in the organization and any level in an organization. So if there's one thing that people take away today, it's driving innovation is something anybody can do, regardless of like level or part of an organization.
I love that. And I'm interested that your entrepreneurial journey fed into this as well, and that a big bank like ING was interested in that, because I think sometimes as individuals that maybe step outside of the corporate environment, you think, oh, I've stepped away for good, or I'm not sure how I can actually, if I want to go back into a corporate role, how that might translate across. So what, because as an entrepreneur, you're always having to innovate. What has that experience been like for you, and what were they most impressed by at first?
I think as an entrepreneur, you always don't have enough time for everything you want to do. You have a very strong sense of ownership, because it's literally your face or your name on the door that make things happen, and you have a clear vision, like a clear sense of where you need to go, and also then getting people behind you. So when it came to our family business, we in the Netherlands, we just went through the GSF, and then we also had the real estate crisis in Europe and in the Netherlands, and it's really impacted our business as well. So we were at the time looking at, are we going to like come up with new projects and innovate, or are we going to see if we can actually sell, because right now is a good moment to do that. So we actually did both. So we set up a little innovation group, and we were like, okay, what kind of other offers could we come up with, and how would we make that happen? And we made this whole strategy and this whole plan. And in the meantime, we were also looking for ways to see if we could, merge with another organization that was doing something similar but different, or just like sell the business. So in the end, we decided to sell, but we did also have that strategy in terms of this is how we believe we can go forward. Like these are trends we're seeing, these are problems that our customers are having. So I think that experience of driving a business, being results oriented, and also knowing you need to prioritize to make things happen, because otherwise you just completely, like, there's always more to do. And I think this is also something that I still like work on with clients, with the coaching, in the coaching and in projects. It is about taking ownership for what you want to solve, because it's something that affects you directly. Which is with like the innovation projects we've worked on, with like the 10 times better campaign, for example. Like it is something that directly affects you and that you can also take ownership of and then make impact with. And then how do we prioritize? How do we make sure that we get the right things done by the right time? And also, like, what is the vision that we're working towards? What is the goal, and how do we get people behind us to make that happen? So I think those are the things from my entrepreneurial journey that I took in. And I think the last thing is, it was a family business. So I think a lot of my values when it comes to working with teams and working with people are really grounded in having worked with my family. So that level of trust and support, and being able to speak your mind are still to this day like really important for me in how I engage with people and how people within my teams work together, and also how we work with others.
Absolutely. And we've spoken a lot about your coaching. And it's not only leaders, it is entrepreneurs that you coach, right?
Yeah. And this also goes back to, so for example, in the innovation lab, we had all these startups and entrepreneurial spirits, and then also within the organization, we have people who, who have ideas that they're looking to expand and build out. And what is just so key in like helping entrepreneurs move forward is making sure that there's always the balance between building out your startup or your team, but also taking good care of yourself and making sure that that it's like a holistic approach to how we move things forward. And what I just really enjoy so much about coaching is, if we also look at the link with innovation, it is at the core of it. It is same ingredients, different pies, because it constantly comes down to, what is in your way, why you're currently not moving forward, and what can we do to work through that. So whether that is a process at the moment in the deal structure that is not working for you, or whether that is trying to get customers to sign up to your new startup, or whether that is getting buy-in from senior management to drive an idea forward. These are all things that we can work through with similar approaches. So it's always about what is actually the problem, like what is the status quo, what information do we already have, what is the current situation. That's always where I start, like the scoping session. So whether that is an individual or whether that's a project, and then just going through the
same principles. It is really good to simplify. But as in the entrepreneurial space, and I know it's the same in a corporate environment, there's that temptation to just work all the time if you're super driven. But then going back to efficiency, that actually isn't. It might feel efficient, for a week or two, but it's actually not. How do you go back to basics and help that person who's a workaholic?
There's so many ways to do it. So, and I've also been there myself. Like my dad and I, we would be in the office early in the morning and then wouldn't leave until 11 p.m. and do the same thing all over again the next day.
Okay, but I was like, is there any benefit to doing that?
No. It's short term. It's very short term because it's not sustainable. And it is like this is the holistic perspective, right? And this is also about you are more than just the thing that you're trying to deliver. And I like to keep using the example of an athlete, like say an Olympian runner. Their job might be to run really fast on the track and set a new world record. But to make that happen, they need other things too. It's not just about the training, it's also about nutrition. It's about sleeping well at night. It's about having a supportive group of people around them. It's about maybe they need certain things in their home, like stretching devices, or I'm obviously not really an Olympic runner, so I don't even know what they would need, but it's all these things around you that you need to get the job done. Like if this person is constantly stressing out about their financial situation, or there is a family member that is going through something really tough that really affects them. Like these are all elements that affect their performance on the track. And the same goes for entrepreneurs. The same goes for professionals. To deliver your highest results, your best results, we need to take that athlete mentality and see, okay, are you getting the right nutrition for your body, for your mind? Because again, those days I would work to 11 p.m. around 4 p.m. I was like a bit groggy and a bit slow, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong. And I was like, I only had 4 coffee today. I did not eat anything solid. I've only been sitting down looking at a screen. And yes, I got a few things off my to-do list, but were these actually the most important things? Not really. So this is then where it's about, okay, what is right now your status quo? If by 4 p.m. you feel exhausted, that might be something we can start with addressing. Then if you realize that by the end of the day, you've been busy all day, but you haven't actually done what you wanted to do, let's work on prioritization. Let's break down what are the main things you want to get done, and bring tools to the table for that, to just make sure that you make your days work for you to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, whether it is personal, whether it's professional, whether it is in building a startup. It's all connected.
And so what are your kind of, I know I've talked about non-negotiables, right? With I worked with a coach. I've worked with a few coaches in different capacities, but we sort of worked out when in the day I work best, and talked about things from a holistic point of view. But I kind of know what works for me, but what do you find works for you?
Yeah. So I know what does not work for me is if I have this sort of big, vague list of things that need to be done, because then it's unclear for me what actually needs to be done, and then I don't get started. So what I need is, I manage my whole life with Trello. Everything is
so do I.
Trello, like
Well,
to the
not
recipes
everything,
that I make. Everything.
Yeah.
Like I am obsessed. But what I really need is to break down the things that I want to get done, and then what it means to, what do I need to get started on them in the first place? Is there any interdependency somewhere? Identify that, and then break down what do I actually need to do. So, for example, I had to return a package to the mail office, to the post office, and I had to do this last week already, and I just didn't do it. And I was like, okay, why am I not? What is stopping me from doing this? I was like, well, I probably don't necessarily really know what I need to do, because I need to get the return label, I need to get it back, put it in. I need to find a moment in my calendar
it
when I can go,
mundane.
Yeah, and it's also like, and I've shown up there before, and the door was closed because they were shutting down early. So by just then breaking it down into like small steps that I could then also actually put in my calendar and sort out, I got it done. So dropped off the package yesterday. Very proud of myself.
Well done.
So that's something I really need, to just break down the most mundane tasks sometimes, to make it very tangible for myself, what needs to be done, what that looks like, before I can actually do it.
And I mean, you've moved countries, so you know about visas, and I'm just thinking of, my system's there. You always need a list, and chip away at this life admin stuff. But anyway, that's very off topic. But as you say, it's very holistic and or part of life anyway. But how can people find you? What's the best way of approaching you? And what is your main how is the best way to work with you at the moment?
Yes. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I would just love to hear your story and what is in your way. and based on that, see if there's anything I can do to help, or if I know someone in my network who might help to move you forward.
And if you're not watching this on LinkedIn, it's Suzanne Charlotte Vos.
I realized later that I should have put my whole name in the LinkedIn Live. So in terms of learning new things, that's what I learned today.
Awesome. Well, so excited to talk to you today. And we've certainly had some very long conversations about how we're planning to collaborate. So I'm looking forward to sharing more about that as well as we move forward. So very good. Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our chat.
And thanks, everyone.